The answer, unfortunately, is Destiny 3. This is an article by Paul Tassi, guys. We read it earlier today. I kind of just let it sit, though, for a second. I just wanted to think about this a little bit longer, which is why we're going to be touching on a few points in this article, as well as just giving you my own thoughts surrounding Destiny 3. I know, many of you right now are jumping on your keyboards. Just hold up a second. Let me get to my points, and then you can unload. But Paul here starts. Bungie and Destiny 2 player base are doing some soul-searching after a traumatic week of mass layoffs and unconfirmed but definitely happening delays. Externally and internally, it's known that these delays have been triggered by the poor performance of Destiny 2 after this year's Lightfall expansion, with player engagement down and revenue goals missed by a massive 45%. Now, the answer to this so far seems to be putting all stock in the final shape, the game's last Light and Darkness era expansion. But with the delay, the declines ahead of that release are bound to accelerate, and it being an ending, drop-offs will also happen afterward. Bungie seems like it's in an almost impossible position at this point, trying to please Sony, trying to build multiple new games, trying to stabilize player counts and revenue for Destiny 2, trying to increase employee and player morale in a terrible moment. Guys, this is what's been so crazy to me, is that part of Bungie, their job is not just making Destiny 2, it's not even being split amongst 4 different games, 3 of which are confirmed, 1 should be sitting in incubation, but they're also having to serve as like this live service management firm for these other live service games that Sony are trying to push forward. And we've seen that here recently with Bungie and Naughty Dog and the review of The Last of Us factions, hence why that whole thing's getting scrapped. Now, Paul continues, and the problem is, I don't think there really is an answer, at least not one that isn't extremely drastic. I was just watching the Skill Up show Friends Per Second, where he had on Datto, Bife, and Aztecross, 3 giants of the Destiny 2 community, and when he asked a fairly simple question, what could Bungie do to turn things around from here, specifically after the final shape, everyone mostly looked around and shrugged. No lie, guys, that question that Ralph asked, which is a good question, really has just stuck with me all weekend, to the point that yes, we are in the works right now for what we suggest should happen, not only for the final shape, but the year following. But let's be clear, do I believe anything we're gonna say in that video is gonna make its way into the game? Probably not. Considering the timelines, considering that middle management and below has been saying that their hands have been tied when it came to doing any major changes within Destiny. Skillup's question was a good question, but there's so many variables. Like, if final shape doesn't pop, then who cares about episodes? Who cares about what happens afterwards? If final shape isn't on the level of Forsaken, then nothing else matters. It's gonna take that level of content to earn the trust of the D2 community. And let me just say, having a core audience and a core community is extremely important for something like Destiny, because I know from firsthand experience that people that have actually played this game played it on recommendation from a friend. Rarely have I ever seen someone just stumble upon this game outside of when Destiny 2 first went free to play. Most of the times though, it's friends recommending to other friends. And let me just say, if you don't have a core community, then who the hell is gonna recommend Destiny to anyone? Nobody. Now, Paul continues, better onboarding was one thing brought up, but what that even means 7 years in with 50% of the game's content deleted is unclear. Guys, I've sat down and I thought about this, and unless Bungie really has something up their sleeves, the way the DCV has been handled, the way content has been vaulted, the way storylines have been fragmented, it is a confusing mess. Now, in the wider community, the proposed fixes are impossible, like just unvault all destinations and raids like you're flipping a light switch. Ironically, location lighting is a big technical reason why it's so hard to bring old areas back. What I keep coming back to is that I do not think there is an answer except for Destiny 3, something that does not seem to be on the table at all, but it is essentially the only thing that I can see working as a jump start and a refresh for the series. And to build that may require a break of gas a couple of years so Bungie can work on it instead of grinding out seasonal episodes or more yearly expansions around the clock. My fear is that Bungie will stay on the exact same cadence of content release that they are on now, and it will do nothing to reverse declines. Staying with Destiny 2 indefinitely, all the same problems remain, and you're not going to get some major surge in player population if some new saga launches in 2025, built on the back of 7 to 8 previous years of content. All the problems will still be there. I think everyone needs a break. If Bungie was allowed to put Destiny 2 in maintenance mode for a period of time ahead of making a fully new sequel, players could just play as they felt like it without feeling the pressure to keep up the way they do now. Bungie could allow its seasonal teams to start working on larger content for a full sequel, and this has to be a real sequel, not just a new Destiny 2 expansion that vaults all past content and is called Destiny 3, which would probably be the worst of all worlds. I would say yes, like if there's going to be a D3, especially considering the saga concluding next year, here, it would need to be some sort of time skip, either forward or backwards, but essentially another setting within the Destiny universe. That's how I see D3. Like if D3 rolled out and was like, all right, we're gonna now deal with Savathun and Oryx's sister, Xivu Arath, and we're gonna fight Vex. I'm gonna be honest, guys, I'm not sold. That's not for me. Even if they combined it with all kinds of overhauls and upgrades, that's not a D3. A D3 for me would need to be a huge shift narratively. Now, I know this is not how every game does it. WoW and Final Fantasy XIV and such don't simply stop, and yet I don't know if Destiny can continue this dream of being a full MMO like those games, given the live service model it's adopted, where it can't just return for huge sweeping expansions, but it needs to be pumping out new content around the clock. Well, let me just say on that front, Bungie is really dancing around the edge of being an MMO. We made an entire video of things that Bungie could do to essentially become that MMO. Loadouts was definitely one of them. LFG was also another, and I do like the idea of Destiny 2 being a fully fleshed out MMO. But the difference between WoW and Final Fantasy is those MMO aspects are truly fleshed out. You feel like you are part of a massive multiplayer online game. It feels alive. I dream of the day where we're playing Destiny and you're inside of a patrol and around you are hundreds and hundreds of guardians all on this huge social area. Like imagine if Europa was truly a full-blown planet and not just a patrol area. Now, I know everyone's gonna say, but Cross, the technical issues. Okay, I get it. I'm just giving you my wish list for what I would expect out of a D3. Again, if Destiny 3 rolled out tomorrow and it's like, hey, here's another patrol and here's another strike, dude, I'm not getting with it. Now, you may say, well, if you're worried about player and revenue fallouts before this, stopping live content delivery would kill everything. I get that. However, it feels like the kind of drastic step that would be needed if Destiny or even Bungie is going to survive in the long term. Maybe they couldn't have survived a move like that as an independent studio, but this is where they would have to rely on Sony to give them runway to turn things around in their flagship series. I understand Destiny is a live game, but at a certain point, that works against it as Bungie constantly has to build a road as they're driving on it. Sony's studios thrive by being able to take their time in between sprawling single-player games. And while sure, it's a different genre here, if Bungie wants to re-engage players on the whole, a big new start, a clean slate, new classes, new races, a new galaxy even, a place where new players can join on day one and veterans can be excited to return, they should be allowed that chance. Paul pretty much outlines right here what he would expect from a D3, and I gotta say, guys, that's pretty much it, right? New classes, new races, a new galaxy. The only way I would accept a D3 is if it truly is a sequel and not just Destiny 2.5. If it's gonna be Destiny 2.5, we might as well just stay with Destiny 2. Now, Paul continues, but I don't think that is happening. From my time spent speaking with former and current Bungie employees during this past week, few seem to know or will share anything happening past the post-Final Shape episodes, and Destiny 3 doesn't really seem to be coming up in conversation at all. I simply do not believe that even if the Final Shape is good, it will allow for anything other than a very brief surge in players and sales, and after that, if we're still just trying to trudge through years with similar seasonal content and similar expansions built in D2, I don't think anything ever changes, and the declines will only continue. Sometimes you need drastic action to save a franchise and make sure it's healthy long term. And as much as I may not want to believe it, I think taking a few years off to craft Destiny 3 as a clean slate for new players and veterans alike is the thing that makes the most sense. As scary as it may be for everyone involved, this current path leads nowhere good. Paul, thank you for that article. Guys, I want to give some thoughts on this outside of what was already said. First up, I do want to say that yes, D3 would excite a lot of people, especially folks that have been kind of sitting on the sidelines. Maybe they actually played D2 when it first came out, they didn't like it, just didn't sit with them, and then they bounce. Putting that fresh new number on there would excite people to at least try the game again. But I do want to go over Bungie's track record of vanilla launches. You've got D1 and D2. Now, D1 definitely had its issues when it first launched. Granted, D2 vanilla made Destiny 1 vanilla look like Game of the Year. Destiny 2 vanilla really was the lowest point in Destiny. And you know what's crazy? We had the most players playing in Destiny 2 vanilla. So many people picked up the game. So many people were trying Destiny for the first time. Bungie had the perfect opportunity to say, hey, I know D1 vanilla didn't go that well, but we made all these changes through the Taken King, through Rise of Iron, and now we have Destiny 2, which is going to be the experience you've all been waiting for, and it absolutely flopped. I don't know, guys. If I was a betting man, I would say it's a high probability that unfortunately D3 would have that same launch. The other side of things is I think Bungie's hurting for money too much. I know you're probably wondering how, but confirmed from Paul last week, somehow, some way, Bungie has already ran through $1.2 billion, or at least $1.2 billion has already been allocated. You know, the $1.2 billion that was meant for employee retention, yeah, that money. Guys, I love the idea of a Destiny 3 though. Truly. I think it's definitely going to take way more than just a few years to make. I think Destiny 3 would be something that takes potentially almost a decade if Bungie wanted to do this right. If it was truly going to be a Destiny 3. Like if Bungie was to roll out D3 in 2 years from now, I would be very skeptical of it, and I'm almost certain we would have yet another Destiny 2 vanilla situation. I wish a Destiny 3 could fix all of Destiny's problems. And I hear folks talk about we need an engine overhaul, but we recently went over the entire history of the Tiger engine, and if you watch that video, you know that there is way more involved when it comes to just upgrading an engine, much less moving to an entirely new engine. On top of that, even if Bungie was to come out tomorrow and adopt Unreal Engine 5, they have developers that have been working in that studio for decades on the Tiger engine. It's not as if they could just change gears and suddenly they're now super adept at Unreal Engine 5. Also, when it comes to overhauling an engine, we touched on the times that Bungie actually had to do that and the amount of people required and time. That alone, at least a decade and a half ago, took years and like 400 people. Now, I'm not saying all these things to dissuade you from wanting a Destiny 3 or dissuade you from wanting a better quality Destiny experience. I believe those things need to happen, but none of those things will matter, in my opinion, if you don't address the root of so many problems that are present at Bungie, and that is the leadership. Guys, this past week has not really sat well with me, and it's not because there were layoffs. I do agree that the layoffs and how they were done could have been handled so much better. For me though, it's this simple blog post that Bungie put out the other day, our path forward. Now there are some good things in this blog post, and essentially what it boils down to is that the Destiny development team here is letting you know how many people they have dedicated to making the final shape the greatest expansion possible, giving us examples like Forsaken, the Witch Queen, and the Taken King. And whether or not you think those examples are good examples, or decide which one of those is actually the best standard bearer, as Bungie put it, I think we can all agree that these are definitely the 3 best expansions ever in Destiny. With that being said, at the bottom of this post, we see CU Starside, the Destiny 2 dev team. I have to ask, why is it that the first communication Bungie gives us, after we waited all last week, after seeing leaked article after leaked article about what's happening with the game, finally we get something and it comes from the Destiny dev team and not the leadership body? It's disturbing, guys. Guys, I feel like there is an accountability issue within Bungie. One that I wasn't really aware of, but I got a message from a friend, someone who was very close to Bungie, who knows the inner workings of Bungie. You see, I was already feeling bothered about the lack of accountability, and the most we got from Bungie was essentially them coming out and saying that Pete Parsons and others gave up their bonuses. And although, yes, that is very charitable of them to do, keep in mind, bonuses are tied to performance, or normally that's the case. And I would argue that with revenue projections down 45%, giving up bonuses should be the least of what's expected of upper management. Keep in mind, guys, that years ago, Nintendo CEO Satoru took a 50% pay cut for 5 months to atone for losses, while other senior executives, including Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto, who all took somewhere around 20 to 30% off their salaries. Fellas, that's leadership. Now, a statement that was made to me throughout this conversation that really stood out to me, and I just want to share with you. Quote, leaders were more concerned about making Destiny what they wanted, rather than making Destiny what the community wanted. Guys, throughout this conversation, it was very apparent to me that there are certain egos within Bungie's leadership that even when the writing is on the wall, even when projected revenues fall 45%, they're not the ones that have to look at the bad decisions they put forward. Instead, it is the developers themselves, the people that are actually making the product. And before anyone jumps up and says, Cross, this is just how the corporate world is, believe me, I've got an answer for you in just a moment. But let me just read this message that I got back, and I actually want to share the first question that I asked. I simply asked the question, how do you feel about leadership at Bungie? Is what happened this past week truly a leadership problem? They go on to say, it's hard to say. I'm not the person who could explain macroeconomic trends that justify the moves here. That said, look at the overall industry. There have been quite a few bad bets over the years. Decisions leading to extreme pressures on teams, crunch, pivots, general decisions that are led by business or simply ego that clash with player expectations or desires from a product. Sometimes, lack of oversight until things hit a breaking point and requiring overhauls. How many Luke Smiths, Chris Barretts, and Mark Noseworthys are truly held accountable during the repeated bad times? If the money continues to roll in, they continue to fail upwards. This situation situation feels like everything's catching up after so many years. But the low levels that were forced to execute on these bad plans are paying the price. During said bad times, leaders truly can feel out of touch, riding off poor sentiment as mega fans being too attached, but also sometimes forward Reddit threads saying the narrative team should be fired, sent directly to the narrative team that was forced originally to completely rewrite an expansion with a handful of months rather than a year's timeline. Guys, if that is not an eye-opener to you, I don't know what is. Guys, that's all I'm gonna say on the leadership front. Outside of that, I'm just kind of shooting in the dark. But when I have asked questions to a lot of people surrounding Bungie, something they all state is that the absence of leadership has been felt for years. Quote, they ascended into spaces where they don't interact. Now, it was also told to me that Joe and many across the team have been the true leaders during the hardest times, but they can only do so much when the decisions above them tie their hands. Guys, I want a Destiny 3. I want Final Shape to be the greatest expansion ever, and I think that we may get there. But I also believe that if the right people are not in leadership roles, then this will be a continuous cycle. And perhaps it's a cycle that you're okay with. And again, everyone's defense to this is that this is just how the corporate world is, right? Guys, I'm gonna play this clip real quick by Steve Jobs. After you've watched this, I want you to ask yourself, do you feel like the reins of Destiny and Bungie are truly in the right hands?
What happens is, like with John Scully, John came from PepsiCo, and they at most would change their product, once every 10 years. I mean, to them, a new product was like a new size bottle, right? So if you were a product person, you couldn't change the course of that company very much. So the people that can make the company more successful are sales and marketing people, and they end up running the companies. And the product people get driven out of the decision-making forums. And the companies forget what it means to make great products.